Welcome to FAB Conversations. I am Sonu Bhasin, and FAB is Families and Business. This is a podcast where we have conversations about people, about business people, and of course, family businesses. As always, before I start the conversation today, I do urge you to subscribe to my podcast. The conversations are pretty interesting, even though I say it myself. And do subscribe. And if you like the conversation, do press the like button and do share it with people who you believe will enjoy it. So, my guest today is Ambassador Deepa Wadhwa. Anyone wants to take a guess as to what she does or did? I think not. So, as the title suggests, Deepa has been part of the coveted IFS, the Indian Foreign Service, and the lady packs quite a punch. She served in two of our toughest neighbors, China and Pakistan. And actually, I will ask her which of the two was tougher, China or Pakistan. And then she punched right through the glass ceiling and she punched it hard. She was the first woman Indian ambassador in Japan and Qatar. She also represented our country in key UN negotiations. After all the hectic life across the world, she's now settled in Delhi, but her life continues to be hectic. She now serves as an independent director in various corporates. She continues to be the chair of the India-Japan Friendship Forum. And in recognition of her work, she was honored with one of the highest civilian order of Japan, which is the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun. And this was given by the emperor himself. I'm very excited about the conversation, as my understanding of the life of an ambassador is limited to the Netflix series, The Diplomat, and I'm quite prepared to be surprised. So, welcome to Fab Conversations, Deepa. How are you today? And I hope there have been no more 12-hour flights from Delhi to Bombay.
Lovely to be on this program, Sonu, with you. And I was just wondering about destiny that brought us together and a bit of bad weather and geopolitics and all together. We stuck for 12 hours next to each other on this aircraft. And, struck up such a very natural sort of friendship with each other. It was like we'd always known each other and chatted all the way through.
I know.
Yeah.
I imagine if I had a surly old man sitting next to me, those 12 hours would have felt like 24 hours. These 12 hours just flew. So, viewers, Deepa and I were in a 12-hour flight from Delhi to Bombay. That's another story by itself, and maybe we'll talk about it another day. But today, the conversation is more about Deepa. So, Deepa, you've been a career diplomat, and now you're part of the corporate world. And do you find the corporate world more difficult to navigate, or was the world of international diplomacy easier?
To begin with, let me just go back a little bit, your introduction to me. Thank you very much for it. Yes, I joined the Foreign Service in 1979, when I think the number of women in the Foreign Service were about 10, 11%, not too many. Now we have far more.
Well, 10, 11% is even more than what it was in the corporate world at that time.
Yes, they were, but there were women who joined and who left for family reasons and so on. So in some way, we were still a vanguard. I think a lot of women who were in the vanguard of the changes that came about as far as women's rights were concerned and their position. Yeah. Insofar as the postings you said, China and Pakistan, I lived in China. I lived in China for a long period of time, learned Mandarin from Hong Kong, lived in Beijing twice. Pakistan, I never really lived in, but what I did was I handled the Pakistan desk, as it were, from the Ministry of External Affairs, which really involved dealing with the relationship on a day-to-day basis, sort of 24-hour basis, traveling very often to Pakistan, and so dealing with it in that context. So I just wanted to, make clear the differentiation of the two. Yeah. And yes, of course, it was, it was expected when I joined, most of us, that, if we really didn't do something terrible, we would end up being ambassadors. But again, when everyone says I was the first Indian woman ambassador to Qatar and to Japan, and it sounds very nice, but it also talks about the journey of Indian women in the diplomatic service. And I'm sure, like the journey of women in the corporate world, like yourself. Yeah. Because there was some period, a point in time when we all got visible. We had years behind us, we got visible. I was fortunate because of these two countries. Why I mentioned them? Because they're seen as typical male bastions.
Right.
Where you don't really send women. So my first posting was Sweden, and Sweden was very gender friendly. In fact, the number of women ambassadors there from all countries was huge. Lovely posting, and so on. The other two, I mean, people thought they would be challenging, but let me tell you that being a woman had its advantages. But I think we can talk about it as we go ahead.
Yeah.
Talking about this, segueing into the corporate world.
Yeah.
Here again, all the time I thought that we lived in two silos. You have the corporate world who looks with a certain amount of disdain at the government, and as this really slow moving, not most efficient, sometimes corrupt kind of establishment they have to live with. And we look at the corporate world very often as with not disdain, but perhaps with some kind of we have
suspicion.
Not even suspicion, so we don't take everything at face value that is there. So they're good guys, they're bad guys. But what brought about a big change in the way these two establishments or institutions, silos, looked at each other was really 1991. And one happened to be already part of the Foreign Service by that time. I was a young diplomat, had done about a decade and some, because that is the year of our reforms, our economic reforms, when we realized that the best way really for India was for us to join forces and to work together, and that those walls really had to be sort of in a way breached.
Between the government and the business world.
Absolutely, it had to be breached. And I think this was a great difference, at least in the life of a diplomat.
I'm sure
from what was of diplomacy.
I'm sure in the life of a corporate leader as well.
Exactly. So, we started working with CII and FICCI and the corporates, and we actually were very happy to be able to bring our best of the corporate world to, in front of the, the governments where we were, or the corporate world, and say, look, this is what India has an offer. And that's been a wonderful journey. So when I segued into the corporate world, it wasn't.
Yeah, so the electricity apparently just went off. So Deepa, now that we are all back with electricity, so we were talking about how the corporate world and the government world came together after 1991, and that we really put our best foot forward when it came to dealing with the foreign countries, vis-a-vis government as well as business.
That's right. So, I think that was a great learning experience. And then we all, we were actually normally diplomacy was, traditional diplomacy was more politically oriented. But we all started looking at the economics part of it. It was great fun. The reason was that you would see the results, the tangible results in front of you. When you could bring a change, you could bring something about, rather than, the larger political, geopolitical thing where everybody sits and talks about and speculates about,
and it takes
scenarios that could happen.
Yeah.
That's right. So that was interesting. And also in this process, we had to learn actually what the laws were, what the compliance systems were, because, you have to give confidence to the people abroad that when you come into India, there's the law, this is the law of the land, this is what can be done to protect your interests and so on. So it wasn't a very difficult, I think, transition, as it were, from one to the other. And I do keep a foot in both, in the sense I still do work in what was my core area of competence, which was really foreign policy and strategic affairs.
Great. Now, you did talk about business, and you did talk about breaking down the walls between diplomacy and business. And I do want to then go straight into the question that I thought I'll ask you later. So just to set the context. So, for all of us who love Uniqlo and we love going and shopping at Uniqlo, we have Deepa to thank because it is Deepa who is responsible for getting Uniqlo to India. And I will let Deepa tell the story. Deepa, it's such an interesting story. Please tell us.
Sonu, that's a huge kind of burden to say I really was singly responsible. But I must say that it's a lovely story, which I like to say, really about this tangibles that you could see.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I moved to Tokyo, normally ambassadors go and we meet all the big corporate houses and they call you over, those with interest in India, the standard, what happens. Now, what had happened was that I discovered Uniqlo when I was in Tokyo. And I just loved the products. I mean, they were very cost effective, they were high quality. But what one realized very soon was it was a bit different from the normal big Japanese corporates in the sense it was really it had been built by a single man, Mr. Yanai. So that was one part of it. The other thing that it had grown huge, it was multi-billion, it was global, but most of the sourcing was from China. And, like most Indian ambassadors do, and we do this very often, we do market surveys, we look at products that could be matched. How do we get, to begin with, how do we get production in India, to service the global markets? And then, of course, there are those who want to open retail outlets in India because, we have really a young and growing market. So everybody sees the value of that. So I tried to meet Yanai-san, as it were, from Uniqlo, and I said, I must go and talk to him and say the opportunities in India and so on. It took a little while to meet him, which was a little unusual compared to other CEOs of companies.
He didn't want to meet you?
He took a little while to give me a meeting, which I thought was unusually long, almost a year before I finally got a meeting with him.
Yeah.
So I went in there.
Which year was this, Deepa?
When was this? This was 2014.
2014, I see.
Yeah, so this was 2014, the first half. So it was 2014, maybe January, February or so.
Okay.
And then, so I went to see him and then I gave my pitch and all of that. And, very, very sort of powerful personality. And, he heard me through, but he's also very blunt. And I found later he was a wonderful person, but he said to me, I'm really not interested in India because we've looked at India before.
Right.
And, as a country to source from, that you can't ensure quality, delivery schedules go awry, there's this problem and that problem. And so really, I haven't been looking at it. And, we've been sourcing from China, same time zone, the various things why China was preferable. And, as this conversation went, he probably saw my face fall, And after a while, he said to me, okay, I'll go to India. I've been asked this before, but I'm willing to go to India. But, I want to meet somebody in authority. I want to meet your prime minister. So I was a bit taken aback. And I said, yes, of course. And not our prime ministers, irrespective of which government, very, very open to meeting these heads of large corporations across the world.
Yeah.
So I said, sure. But the reason why I hesitated was we were just going into elections in 2014.
2014, yes.
So I said to him, we're going into elections. And, once elections are over, and depending on whoever wins and is the prime minister, I will try then.
Yeah.
So the 2014 elections happened in the month of June.
Yeah.
I sent a message to Delhi and, giving the background of Uniqlo.
Yeah.
And so I asked for this meeting, and you wouldn't believe I immediately got a positive response.
From the PMO?
Yes.
Wow.
That was wonderful. And so I spoke to Yanai-san, and off he was. It was all in a few days. And he went there and he spent time with Prime Minister Modi. And I think what was supposed to be a 20-minute meeting went on for much, much longer. And he came completely a changed person. And when he came back to Tokyo, he called me and he said, I want to meet you. And he came to my embassy. And this is a gentleman I had a lot of trouble meeting first.
Right.
He came to my embassy. And then there he was, all ready to go. And of course, it takes time on both sides. And I remember when the first retail outlet happened, by the time I'd retired, I'd come back to Delhi. But Yanai-san remembered and invited me to the opening.
Wow.
And since Uniqlo has been a huge success story. So every time I look at that, at the Uniqlo outlets, I just feel a little happy within myself that, it was my pushing a bit that helped.
Oh, that's such a wonderful story. I mean, wonderful story because, there's a little bit of personality involved, there's you involved, and a complete turnaround by a skeptic. But I think it's a wonderful story because it just showcases the power when business and government come together. And it's not only, the government that benefits, it's people who benefit, because ultimately what corporates do, a large part of them is to do work that benefits the ultimate consumer in whichever
That's right.
way. And therefore, I mean, to me, it's a lovely story. And I'm sure that there are stories like this across countries. And, the more people that you speak with or you may know, there may be other stories about how the coming together of business and government actually helped both countries. So, in my introduction, I did say that I had no idea about the life of an ambassador. So one thing is that you ask for appointments for meetings with people and they give it to you, except Yanai-san, of course. But otherwise, is it as glamorous? Do you have to rough it out? Do you have targets of any kind? I mean, from a corporate world, targets are very important, KPIs, etc. So, what is the life of an ambassador really like? Is it like a CEO or is it like a regional head of, in corporate terms?
So, it's a bit of everything. To begin with, we're not born ambassadors, as you know. We kind of go up this ladder slowly and surely.
Absolutely.
And it's not always very easy and as glamorous as it seems. It depends on where you go. I can tell you that I think my first posting was Hong Kong when we went to learn Mandarin, which by itself was quite a challenge. I keep saying we very often because my husband's a diplomat also, and and I will tell you that about how kind government has been, to encourage women, to stay in service. So my husband and I were posted to Hong Kong to learn Mandarin, and then we went to Beijing, and this was in the year 1983. A completely different world, not the China that you see today. And in that, there is a lot of lessons in the sense that in about 3 to 4 decades, how a country can change.
Yeah.
At that point of time, I think in almost every aspect,
Right.
they were visibly behind us, in terms of you just lived there. I mean, it was so backward. You couldn't get vegetables, you couldn't get food products. We imported almost everything. There were no cars on the road, excepting of the high carders and the diplomats. So that whole thing, it wasn't an easy world. And why I say it wasn't glamorous, you didn't get all the stuff that we are so used to in a globalized world today. For example, we learned that we could barely get any Indian food stuff. Right. So we used to get packages that came once in 4 months from India with dal and something. And, we look forward to that because we could get that. It wasn't easy at all. And this is true of not only of China, but of a lot of other countries in different parts of the world, And I don't want to mention areas, but even some of the more developed countries, life wasn't very easy. The other thing is that, you have to learn to adjust and be, and not only you, but you take your family through that also.
Right. Right.
So I should tell you that I had my first child in Hong Kong, which, for all practical purposes, part of the first world. And I had my second one in Beijing. Which was quite the opposite. It was quite an interesting experience. I had a doctor who was there at my delivery, who during the Cultural Revolution, she went off to manage, I think, a poultry farm. That's what happened to the intellectual. Then she had come back and she, to my delivery, she'd talk about that. And it was a different world. But I must say, every part of it may not be glamorous, but extremely interesting and exciting. If you are interested in people, if you're interested in, different cultures, different histories, different, politics, it's extremely interesting because like every day is kind of a new lesson in life. So that I did think was interesting. The glamour part of it is, of course, it takes a while when you come back, you become ambassador. But before that, you don't only work in embassies abroad, but you also work in the ministry. To just go back in the embassies abroad, what you fundamentally really do is, and I've said this very often, that embassies of any country abroad are really huge PR offices of their countries.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. You're giving the best story of your country out there. Well, you're explaining your country. Yeah, this is really what you do. And to be a kind of PR office, you've got to believe in your product. And the product in this case is India, So you've got to know your own country extraordinarily well. And be very convinced about the product that you are really putting forward before the world.
Just to interrupt you here, are you guys then given training? Because, especially in the context of what is just happening around us, and it's a battle of narratives. And all around, what we're hearing is that India is unable to put forward its narrative. around the world. And like you said, around the world, it is the responsibility of the embassies and the staff therein. So is there kind of a communication dossier that goes out to all the embassies that says, guys, this is the message for the day, and this is what you're going to go out and tell the world? And then the second question is, does the world really listen to us?
Oh, yes, on both. So to begin with, we do go through training. Very much so. I remember when we were young and there wasn't this Foreign Service Institute, which is there now, and in the years about 40 plus years ago, we actually did a module in the institute, the Indian Institute of Mass Communications.
Mass Communications, okay.
But there was there's every aspect of your job you are trained in by the time you go out. So that's certainly so. And one of the things is your outreach. We don't just sit in our embassies and look at papers like you think bureaucrats wait. We have to go out, and you've got to sort of have a huge outreach and be able to meet people, whether it is the local government, whether it is the media, whether I talked about corporates, whether it is other government representatives, whether other government journalists and so on. So you gather information, you exchange information, and you convince people about the narrative of your country. And I think even now, I know I've been hearing people say that in this last recent few days that initially, and I underline initially, that the Indian narrative wasn't so well heard. But just look at the last 2-3 days. And the reason I think is very apparent, which was that in the middle of a war, while you're engaging in a war, we talk about facts and we don't really go out to embellish them. And now that the world can see for itself, you can see the narrative changing, even the New York Times. But if you see
I like the way you say even the New York
Even the New York Times, exactly. But if you saw our ambassadors, our various ambassadors in our High Commissioner in the UK, our ambassador, I think I saw Australia, in DC, in Spain, various colleagues, they're all out there on TV, telling your part of the story. And of course, this is not only because there has been the events of the last few days, but just generally. And it's been very interesting. Sometimes when you have to go out and speak, you've got to learn about yourself. And I recall, and it was sort of, I was the woman, so it's very it's so predictable that would want to talk about the status of women in India. So
which is much better than the status of women in some of the other developed countries.
Precisely. Or developed countries, I'll tell you that. So, to be able to this, you had to then read up yourself, because we were all privileged in a way, but read about not only about women in India, and you have to be truthful. There's no point of, whitewashing the whole thing, but also talk about the journey of Indian women. 1947, I love this statistic, and I will not say love is not the right word, it's a very effective statistic, that in 1947, when we got independence, the level of literacy for women in India was 9%. 9%.
Wow.
So the Brits had been around for some 200 years, and at that point with all of us, and few of us privileged, our mothers were educated, our grandmothers were educated, 9% was the literacy rate among women, to where we are now. This is a journey of our country, of all of us together. And it's very good to put these kind of figures out there before they sit there and they sit in judgment on, this and that and the other.
Agreed.
So it's great. It was great to be able to tell the story of India. And I said, one had to be convinced about it. And, I certainly was.
Yeah. So, talking of women and, one of the things that every corporate talks about is that we need more women, especially at senior levels. And, I'm also on various boards, and the boardroom conversation is, okay, let's set a target for the CEO. What percent of women in the senior management? But it doesn't happen. And the lazy excuse always is that, we can't, the women leave because, we can't, because they have to follow their husbands, or we can't post them to places where they'll have to go alone. And I just feel it's a very, very lazy argument. And when I look at women like you, when I look at the government, the government has done so well when it comes to women reaching the top position. You as the ambassador, which is the equivalent of a CEO, haven't reached there by sitting in one place and saying, नहीं मेरे को family के साथ रहना है, नहीं मेरे को ये करना है, मेरे को कहीं और नहीं जाना है. I'm sure you've had postings where you were away from your family. So now that you are also part of the corporate world, just talk about the difference as you see between why there are very few women in senior levels in the corporate world versus why women in the government seem to be doing exceedingly well as secretaries, as ambassadors, as heads of PSUs, etc.
I think really we have to go back, Sonu, to our constitution.
Okay.
That whole equality principle that was embedded there.
Yeah.
Then you started your civil services.
Yeah.
And I can tell you there was a debate. Do you have women joining the civil services? Because we were going into this whole, the Union Public Service Commission as a constitutional body, and then there would be examinations and people would join. I think there was more of a consensus of women joining the IAS, the administrative service, or even, the other allied services. But there was apparently, what I have read, serious doubts about should we send women out as diplomats?
This was a serious conversation.
There was a serious conversation with the British who were still there, and it was a handover period. And the British saying, well, they didn't think it was such a good idea because it wouldn't be very easy for women to go out and work, in strange countries by themselves and so on. And here you have Nehru, the Democrat. I think he also, it's not that he didn't have a doubt, but I think he allowed himself to be convinced based on what our constitution stood for, that you could not deny women a position in any area that government was opening up and saying this is not for them and this is not for them. Of course, barring, I suppose, the military and so on. And so from the first examination itself that was held, it was open to women. And we had an outstanding woman called Miss C.B. Mutama, who joined as the first woman in the Foreign Service. I think it was the year 1949. Coincidentally, she was from my college in Madras, but that has nothing to do with me, but I think really her. Because she really was the one. And she, we met her when I joined service, and I realized what a struggle it was for her. It's one thing to pass an exam and to qualify, and another for the system to accept you.
Right.
So there was a time when embassies and ambassadors didn't want to accept a woman because they thought it was a big responsibility for them to take care and to be able to protect a woman. But, cut to where we are now, I do believe the government is a great equal opportunity employer.
Right.
You write this exam, you come in, you're competent enough, and, you rise. I mean, it isn't like there is no question of competence. Everybody rises together. That's not that. There are certainly, they do expect you to be able to deliver as well as the men. But I must tell you a story here. When I think it was the late 80s, and I had come back after my posting to China, and we were called by what was then called the Department of Personnel and Training, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, because there was talk and they wanted a discussion on whether there should be quotas for women. To increase quotas to increase the number of women in the civil services. So there were women called, we were all very young, and they called young women, we were all about 30s, from different services, a cross-section of services, and they called us and they said, what did we think? It was so interesting. To a woman, we all said no to the quota. Because, it was tough enough as a woman, because the story is the same everywhere. You've got to work doubly hard to be recognized half as much as a man. That's no different. That's actually a social kind of mindset, and that's there. But we didn't want to have this also to be said that, she's there because she comes with quota. So we all wanted to fight it out, fair and square. So, and despite that, I think the government had been very, very fair in allowing us to break glass ceilings and being very caring. And I talked at the beginning about the fact that my husband and I were posted together as far as it was administratively possible. There were times when we were not. As ambassadors, of course, we were not. But, and I know a lot of other colleagues, not everybody is married to another diplomat. My husband happened to be one. And so women were sent off to difficult postings. All of that certainly was there. But, for example, on maternity leave,
Hmm.
Women could take off for initially it was 3 months, now it was 6 months, but they allow on one round or the other for a woman to take off for a year, two, and I know that the rules still about 5 years.
Hmm.
You go on study leave and so on, and very often women do this so that they can take care of the family in that very
Hmm.
important stage,
Hmm.
and come back and find that your seniority is protected.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
Your seniority is protected. And that is what keeps the women going in the
that's right.
government. Have you tried to bring about this change in the various board companies that you're on the board of? Because I'm sure they too talk of senior women in management, but I think the percentage, if you look at it, would be less than 2% or 3%. I don't even think it's in double digits in senior management. I mean,
That's
junior
right.
management, you have a lot of them. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge. So, okay, so besides all the advice that you give the corporates, is there anything that you like to tell the women who are listening and who are watching you here on how to, like continue and break glass ceilings and not whatever. What is the advice for young women?
First to go to the corporate thing, I think everybody is very conscious of the fact, particularly because ESG ratings and things like that now. So
Yeah,
everyone talks diversity, everybody sets targets, and depends
yeah,
on the industry. It's easier somewhere and more difficult somewhere. But I do believe that you have to give a bigger push. And
yeah.
I think in every place that, every board that one goes to, one does look at the figures and one does look at this
Look at
particularly. I certainly
yeah.
do. As far as women are concerned, whether corporate or government, I think the basic thing is to, first of all, have no hesitation that hold you back.
Hmm.
That's the first thing. I mean, that you should be able to really reach for the sky and believe that you can do that. That's the
Hmm.
most important thing. But for me, I think equally important is, please don't ask for special treatment. Once you're
Don't
in
be your
it,
worst enemy. Don't
don't be your
stereotype women.
yeah,
Right,
yeah. For
right.
yourself, for all of them. I mean, legitimately. And I have a story to tell that, once there was a colleague of mine, and he's still a very dear friend. Both of us were dealing with two very key countries in the Ministry of External Affairs, and we used to share a room.
Hmm.
And it so happened that my children and my husband and my maid all went down with chickenpox, excepting me.
Oh dear. Hmm.
And my boss said to me very nicely, everybody gets chickenpox. And I don't think that's going to be a reason for you to say you have to take leave and stay at home. And so I looked at him, and I came every single day and I worked because I had to prove myself.
Right.
My colleague, on the other hand, my male colleague, and his wife was working but not in the ministry, he went and said, look, I have to take half day off because
Hmm.
we're taking turns taking care of our children. And the
Hmm.
same male boss said, how wonderful that is that, you want to share the burden. So they
Hmm.
were mindsets that were there that you worked against. But,
Hmm.
I think the fact that I was so conscious that I'm not going to ask for anything special being a woman, it was at a
Right.
cost to myself. Sometimes it's at a cost to
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
But I think really it is. So
Hmm.
there are some campaigns nowadays that I see and I say, it's
Hmm.
really not going to help us if we say,
Hmm.
we need days off for this, that, and the other. We have to be very
Right.
careful.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm talking about.
No, I know. No, so this is I don't want it to be men bashing and women whatever, but there is a lot that women need to do themselves to make life better for themselves in the corporate world, and it is my firm belief that we can't keep playing the victim, and yes, we have to work harder. We have to put in more work than our male colleagues.
That's right.
uh, if you don't want to do it, don't do it. I mean, the good thing is nobody is going to be after you to say work harder because you have to do well. But if you want to get ahead, and that's my advice every Women's Day when I'm called by various corporates, is decide if you want to, if you're ambitious, forget about cribbing about the fact that I have to work harder. Do it if you want to. I mean, nobody is going to come and give you things. Just do things yourself. But coming back to your life as an ambassador and, living in various countries, different cultures and very different cultures, because Sweden would be very liberal and Japan would be very conservative. So, any special nuances of cultures that you found interesting in various countries? And was there anything, a thread of continuity or the thread of sameness that ran through all the cultures?
Yeah, very interesting. Now's the time when, since you sit back and you look back at those times and you think of it, at that time you're sort of in the
Okay, so we're back. Electricity's come back when it gone, and we were talking about different cultures and the thread of continuity across cultures, if any.
So apologies again. I can't do much about the electricity. But when you think about, you sit back and you think, I must tell you, one would imagine, as you said, that Sweden would have been one of the easiest.
Yeah.
In terms of the fact we're English speaking, European, developed, in many ways it was one of the most difficult. I'll tell you why. Because they were constantly, they were questioning India. They were, I kept saying all the time, I talked about, I said all the questions I was asked were about cows, chaos, and caste. Everywhere you went.
Right.
The perception was there was still that prism through which they looked at India. So there was a lot of explaining to do. And there was a little sense of, we've reached where we have, and no, oh, you poor women and things. And I know in many cases, our women were doing as well or better than theirs. And I had this very interesting little information which I got when I was there, which was that a man and a woman doing the same job, even in the government, got different salaries.
In
I
Sweden?
said, that's right. And I said,
Wow.
how is that possible? And they said, because men bargain more effectively for their terms of work than women. Now, in India, if that had to happen, the government would have gone straight to the courts.
Absolutely.
You could never discriminate like that if you were doing the same job.
Right.
So, they're inbuilt a different system. So it isn't like in every way that they were superior to us. So there was a lot of explaining to do. Of course, we made wonderful friends. The economic relationship was wonderful, and you could push companies and all of that. So it was, so that was what I remember a lot about Sweden. Otherwise, in every way, a wonderful, beautiful country. And then when I was sent to Qatar as ambassador, and I was the first woman, as you mentioned, the first Indian woman ambassador to be sent to the GCC. And, my male colleagues in the Ministry of External Affairs said that, they're crazy. Why in the world would they send you? I mean, what do they think you can do there? It's, such a male world and things like that. But I still recall that when I went to present my credentials, you present your credentials, a letter from your president to the head of state of the other country. And I went to present my credentials to the Emir of Qatar. He told me how happy and honored Qatar was, that India felt that they could send a woman to Qatar.
Wow, that meant that India could trust Qatar to look after.
We were recognizing the progress of Qatar. And, this is something so interesting that he said. And when I was there, I must say that, when you are representing India, and I'm saying this because in places in the Middle East, your population, that the population of Indians far outnumbers the locals. So there were 2 Indians to every single Qatari. So, they dealt with you no matter what. I mean, they had to deal with the Indian ambassador. So, I mean, they dealt with me officially, but I had a huge advantage that I could also reach the women. And they were Pardanishi women, and there were other women doing very well. There were women who had come out and were working. But it was so much easier for me as a woman to be able to access them. And I must say, it was not difficult as a woman ambassador being in Qatar at all. And the other thing was, because you had a large number of blue-collar workers from your country, I did believe that as a woman, there's a certain womanly empathy. You were more empathetic to their problems. I'm not saying my male colleagues weren't, they'll kill me for saying that. But I think one was far more empathetic, and particularly to women, workers there and their problems. So I found that a very, very soul-satisfying posting from the point of view of what I could do to help people, and particularly my own people.
Right.
And then you come to Japan. So Japan is a jewel in everything. I mean, it's so unique. I mean, it's culture, it's history, it's people, it's economic success and everything. It was just absolutely wonderful in every sort of way. And again, India and Japan have a very special relationship. And my time over there coincided with the time of Prime Minister Abe's return as Prime Minister of Japan. And, he had a very special relationship with India. So it was such an interesting period because, you had an idea, you had a thought, And you could actually see that to fruition. Even
Hmm.
in the not non-corporate, the governmental spheres.
Right.
So it was an extremely wonderful period in every
Yeah.
sense of the word, and saw the relationship grow. And
Hmm.
irrespective of which government was there, we had the UPA, had the NDA with Prime Minister Modi. There was huge bipartisan support in India for the relationship with Japan. Similarly with Japan, so it was
Hmm.
really one of, I think, I was extremely fortunate to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the thread that runs through all my postings? And I think this is so important to tell Indians
Hmm.
that no matter where, no matter what the questions, India is recognized
Hmm.
not as a country, not as a nation state, but as a civilizational giant in the world.
Really.
We've given so much to the world in terms of thought, of ideas, our own history. We Indians, we tend to be very kind of self-critical of various things. Oh, this isn't right. We haven't quite reached that level of development and so on. But look at the history of our country, and people realize what we gave to the world. Everywhere you go, there is that deep respect for India. And that's really wonderful to discover, when you're there. I think in my CV, you see that I did many years of what we call the multilateral.
Right.
That is working with UN-related organizations representing India at negotiations and so on. And that was again where this idea was reinforced, because there could be no outcome without India being strongly on board.
Yeah. But has the perception of India changed over the years that you were in service? I mean, in the 80s, cut to the 2010s, etc., you must have seen a difference in attitude towards India?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you, really, it was after 2000 and the whole IT boom,
The Y2K,
and Y2K and the IT boom. Suddenly people looked at India differently. Suddenly the questions that came to me about caste and chaos and cows became, what is it about Indians? Why are they so good at IT? Why are they so good at maths? I mean, are they really intellectual giants? Honestly, there were always these questions thrown at us. What is it about Indians that makes them so special at mathematics and things like that? The whole perception changed. And you could see this wherever you went. I mean, I think all Indians, not only people like us, being diplomats, who go to immigration counters across the world, suddenly find that there's a completely different way that they deal with us, because we are really looked as people who are going to really contribute to their countries. Especially our IT guys, I must say, they made a great difference in our perception, in the perception of India, and our big corporates who went out. The Tatas who went out and acquired deals, and suddenly it wasn't only FDI coming into India, but our companies were, I think, or not only IT, but the other companies confident enough to go into the world.
Right.
Now, that changed perception hugely, and what that meant was you created jobs. So I'll tell you a story. I love to tell these stories because, I was in Sweden, and there were two deals that came through where two Indian companies, they actually bought out two manufacturing units in different parts of Sweden. They're well-known companies, but I don't really want to particularly take their names. And what happened was that in that little town, that little city, that little district, that was the main industry there. And it was going to close down. And you have an Indian entrepreneur who's going and buying it up and restoring the jobs of the people there. Can you imagine the respect you get? And I knew going to those places, the governor would call you in and say, so-and-so has come in, and this is what is meant in terms of the creation of jobs by Indian companies. All of this really changed the perception of India without a doubt.
Yeah. And I think a side benefit must have also been that the number of Indian restaurants that opened up across the world. Because I remember I went to Luxembourg, in the mid 2000s, and there was maybe one or two Indian restaurants there. And now I'm told that there are like 200 in that small country of Luxembourg. And that's because of Axla Mittal. He's got 5,000 Indians sitting there and working, and plus all the other Luxembourgese. I mean, in Indian food, Indian dress. I had a friend who had to come from Luxembourg for a wedding, and she's a Dutch married to a Luxembourgese, and she wanted some Indian outfit. And I was surprised she did a video call with me from a store in Luxembourg, which was a large store. It wasn't like a pokey little thing. And it had Indian outfits. So she was trying on lehengas and she was trying on dupattas. And I asked her, I said, just ask that lady who owns the store who comes and buys all this stuff because it is so Indian. And in Luxembourg, who would wear it? But I think that is how Indians have just been all over, which is good. I know that we are overshooting the time, but Deepa, I know you're a diplomat and you're tactful and you wouldn't talk, loosely. But which has been which has been your favorite posting and which has been your horriblest posting?
I can answer the first.
I know.
can answer the first question, Maggie.
I thought so, but come on, stick your neck out.
Really, I must say that, when you go out as diplomats, I think the horriblest posting is even not horrible because you are in a position of privilege,
You can retire a diplomat, but you can't take tact out of her.
No, but I think the best certainly was Japan.
Japan.
It was so special. It was so very special. It's just that I fell in love with the culture of the country. It was so different. It's so much easier in the West for us from the kind of educational background that we have to understand the West. Is much easier. But Japan took an effort, and the more you studied it, and the more that there was, it's like peeling off the layers. And I'm still in that process of really understanding and studying that country. So it certainly was, I think, Japan.
Okay, so we let the horriblest be for a conversation offline, but not online. But Deepa, thank you so much for your time and pleasure talking to you. And we shall meet again, but hopefully not on a 12-hour flight to
Yes.
Bombay.
No, we must meet again.
shall.
But I just feel that, serendipity or whatever. I mean, both of us thrown there together like this.
Yeah.
And, and with so much in common. And, that's been really wonderful.
That's life. That's how you meet people. And this is what I also tell a lot of the, especially the women, because, we as women are hesitant to talk to other people, but just go out, you meet wonderful people. Sure, you meet a couple of khadus people, but so what?
Yeah.
I mean, for every good person that I meet, I'm willing to live with meeting 5 khadus people. I mean, it's worth it.
That's right. That's really what life is about. I mean, that's what, really enriches life.
Yeah.
And thank you for enriching my life, Sonu.
No, thank you too, Deepa.